another episode of Tales of Teyvat, a Genshin Lore Podcast. Last week, we discussed the mysteries of the Yae Publishing House, its owner, and those who write and are published through it. We're keeping an eye out for Gold's book to finish out the Albedo and Klee family line of publishings, coming soon. This week, we'll be going beneath the surface to discuss the Chasm. Additionally, I want to remind travelers to visit talesoftevat.com to see visual representations of the lore mentioned during today's podcast. Your guides have put them together for you to make things a little easier to understand. On our site, you can also find some awesome goodies, including artist spotlights from the community for each episode, wallpapers for download, and a way to check out some of our favorite Genshin merch. Finally, feel free to email us at talesoftevatpod@gmail.com to let us know what you thought of this week's episode and what topics you want to see in the future. But let's take our deep dive. Let's fall into the chasm, dive into the chasm, crash into the chasm. I don't know which one is the most appropriate.
It's a hole.
Disappear into a pile of oozing filth in the chasm.
Oh no.
They did not clean out that butthole. Is it not the butthole of Teyvat?
The ground's butthole is definitely dirtier than the sky's butthole.
But it does glow on the interactive map, which I know I brought up before is still one of those things that just gets me. It's the only thing that is animated on that map.
I mean, it is filled with lumen stone or lumen spar.
Does anyone even use that when they fight the ruin serpent anymore?
No.
Exactly.
Like, no.
But before we jump too much into the mechanics of the chasm, or the chasm, as Tiv likes to call it, maybe we should talk a little bit about where exactly the chasm is and when we started to get access to it. We've only had access to it for like a year, maybe?
Yeah, 2.6, which was the update right after I started playing.
Oh my god, was it really?
Yeah, because I started when Yae was first released, and then it was Ayato, because it was Ayato and I think Venti were running on the same banner, and I was trying so hard to get both and I couldn't. Of course I couldn't. And then the Chasm came out because I was like really into artifact farming, and I'm like, oh, this set is specifically for Ayato, and I'm like, now I have an even better set. But but yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 2.6.
It was definitely in between Inazuma and Sumeru.
Yeah. I just remember it being like the start of Zhao having 100,000 reruns.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love Zhao, but he had so many reruns. Like, because once the chasm happened, it was like Zhao, Albedo, Zhao. Like,
bring us
And
Eula.
Never Eula.
Yeah, poor Eula.
Probably the only 5-star I don't have to date.
Well, rumor has it that she's being made into an NPC.
Shut up.
No, she's gonna come back in 3.8 when we get Port Dorman or whatever the fuck that is.
I think she's gonna come out at this rate when Shinaznaya's here.
Yeah, she's the Zaritza.
Oh my god, imagine!
She was actually a ploy for the Lawrence clan to take over a different continent. Oh my god.
No, Amber would never let her do that.
Unless Amber's in on it.
Unless Eula's trying to change them for the better.
But let's go out of the ice cold and into the butthole. So, when we're in...
It's very warm in there.
That's the best one to date, Feeny. Oh my god.
So, we find out that there's a place called the Chasm that even though we have been to Liyue, done the Archon line, been to Inazuma, done the Archon line, no one has told us and we've never noticed before as the traveler. And we find out that the Chasm has been closed for quite some time. It was deemed too dangerous for Liyue's miners and people to go into. There were a lot of adventurers who used to travel in there, including my favorite homegirl in the Chasm, Jixiong. She used to hang out there all the time, and she had just become like a member of the Adventurers Guild when it closed, so she never actually got to explore it. So she was super excited to go down with us, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But the Chasm was actually a huge source of money and commerce for Liyue Harbor, and they really took a hit that they don't talk about a lot in the game when the Chasm had to close.
Yeah, I mean, the mining business, I mean, if that was the whole thing, I mean, it's a giant hole. So they're definitely mining a lot out of there. I can imagine that it caused some issues.
I think it's also one of like the places where jade is primarily found, and we'll get into that why it's in there. not plate tectonics because they don't actually exist in this world.
Flat world confirmed. Flat
No,
Teyvat confirmed.
It's not a flat world. It's just they don't follow the natural order of plate tectonics and their rules, so to speak.
Is that Zhongli's fault since he's like the god of rock?
No, I
Yes.
think that would be the Primordial One because he
Or she.
or they could just be androgynous, like most creator gods are. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be mountains where there are mountains. The only mountain that kind of makes sense is the mountains on Dragonspine. Yes, absolutely. A lot of them don't make sense unless like we just have some random. Anyway, plate tectonics aside.
I'm gonna ask Zhongli about plate tectonics next time I see him.
Oh, please, because none of it makes sense.
I bet Gold's in charge of them.
Oh no. Well, actually, that might make sense because when people dug too deep in that chasm, boom, monsters.
But yeah, so we find out a little bit about the chasm, that it's been closed off because it got really dangerous for miners, adventurers, and people of the Qixing too. So Ningguang closed it down. She was like, nah, no one's allowed in there anymore.
And when it comes to her, I just assume that there's some ulterior motive too, though. Like, I want to believe that it was just that, but she's like, maybe we'll still have some people go over there and get some money. This way nobody else knows.
Well, it's interesting you say that because we know that Yae has been kind of tasked with watching over the chasm as well, from what I understood. And we know that Yae is a very close associate to Ningguang.
Yeah.
In this past Lantern Rite, it seemed like her, Beidou, and Yae were going to have a threesome. So,
Oh my.
it did it not? Like,
What?
those chess puns?
What?
Am I the only one who thought that? Come on. I'm normally the more innocent mind here.
I did not go that way.
I don't remember that. So I think you're a pervert.
No, wait, hold on. I have screenshots.
Oh, of course you have screenshots.
Uh-huh.
Feeny comes with
Just
the
keep
receipt.
on exposing your thirst to the world, Amanda.
Our friend Vanessa was telling me the other day that my PlayStation is running as slow as it does because I have too many screenshots.
It might be.
I don't believe it.
Yeah, no, it really could.
So I found my receipts. So we go up to Ningguang and Beidou. They're standing outside of Ningguang's little place where she vibes, not the Jade Chamber, but the other place. And Ningguang goes, if you don't specify what you mean, how could I know what I should do to please you? To Beidou. And Beidou responds, that woman from Yangshan Tea House sometimes comes aboard to ask for information. She requested the fleet to import some goods, but how could I not know who she's actually working for? And then afterwards, I don't have the screenshot, but she says something like, maybe we should invite her over to play chess one day. So it was a lot of sexual tension going on, and that's what I believe.
You know how the chess games go.
I mean, D-Luke talks about chess, Ayato talks about chess. I can only assume if they mean other things.
The no Caesar chess pieces.
Oh, shut up.
Oh, shit.
Oh my god.
I mean,
what if
they
that
are, though.
What if that ties into the secret society shit? Them talking about chess is actually like a hidden language. Like they're trying to recruit us.
Actually, that's not too
Ooh.
far off. In the Winter's Night, Lotso, someone actually took the image of that chess game that we're assuming the Zaritza is playing with Piero, and it was actually a game, like the first game against an AI computer.
Oh, I hate that.
Oh my god! Like, oh, it's great. No, it's not far off because there are certain rules and like aspects of chess that can translate to like motifs that we see within like the Fatui as well as like around the world.
Anywho, so the chasm, we find out that it was closed. We move on. So I might need a refresher exactly on why we are allowed into the chasm. I know we go to check it out and we are met by this guy who is like, none shall pass. And then we're like, nah, we're here because of Kaching, basically. We kind of use our friends as like an excuse to get in. And then we have to follow like those 7 light pillars or whatever and unlock them. It was like a weird mechanical thing.
Yeah, I don't really remember that too well because I didn't really, I don't know, I just didn't retain the entrance, like the reasoning of all that, like to memory. I was more deeply engrossed in the lore once we got underground and the things that we learned there. But yeah, I remember that they sort of opened it up to us specifically to go check it out because I guess, was it that the miners were in danger or something?
Not the miners.
I forget.
Oh no.
Something was happening and we were sent in to like investigate.
And of course they needed us.
Yeah, it was like a commission.
Oh yes, I believe it was something from Catherine. You're right. She sent us over. She was like, "Oh, perfect. You two can risk your lives again."
Like, as always.
So we go over to the chasm. We do these like weird, like light pillar mechanical things to get the hole open. And quite literally, the chasm is like a rock structure that is built like a funnel. And right in the center, there's a hole that is currently or I shouldn't say currently, but when you first start playing in the chasm area, is locked off by some sort of magical shield. And when we unlock these pillars, that shield goes away and we're able to quite literally jump into the hole.
we gotta like tease the butthole enough so that it relaxes and opens up and lets us in.
And then we can go cowabunga.
Yeah, we quite literally like splunk ourselves down there.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we are spelunking.
A lot of spelunking.
Not to be confused with spunking.
Oh no.
I'll see myself out.
But we go into the chasm, and at this point, we meet a few people who we're going to be working with. One of them is my favorite, Jixiang, but we also meet another woman. I forget her name, and she's actually the one who gives us the Lumen Stone.
Oh yeah, she's over at that table. She convenient's like, "Hey, you're gonna need this. It's dark down here."
Yeah, there's this little cast of characters that we run around with in the chasm, and I really don't remember any of them except Jixiang.
And do you really only remember her because that's like all I talk about all the time?
No, I remember her because at first she's kind of annoying. You're like, stop. But then you end up kind of worrying about her at the end. Like, she's very ambitious, and I really appreciated that about her. And I think she deserves a vision.
Oh, yeah. She's definitely on my list of people I would give a vision to if I was in charge.
The sequel of Genshin. Everyone who needed a vision but didn't get one in the first half.
Maybe we'll like run into her and she like teamed up with Rana as like a new vision wielder. They're like running around together somewhere.
Oh, that would be so cute. Rana and who's the other person and Jet.
Yes.
They all get visions. It's really, if you just go into the Sea of Quanta, there's probably a alternate universe where that's happening.
Oh my god.
Absolutely.
That was my Honkai Sai.
I just want to let our travelers know that I've started playing Star Rail.
I need to get on it. Oh, fuck yeah.
I just felt like they needed to know that update.
That you've been turned.
And we know that I'm playing it.
But yeah, so once we're in the chasm, we unlock, of course, as we usually do, a badillion and one world quests and little things that we can do. But the primary function of our world quest down there is to explore and to help this little ragtag bunch explore deeper into the chasm while also trying to find out why people are in danger and what is going on in there. Also, why are there people down there? I thought it was closed. So maybe Tiff's right and Ningguang's just like monopolizing shit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, other than the adventures that are down there, it's really Fatui. You know, they're always going to get their way in there.
There's no miners at that point.
They're treasure hoarders.
Treasure hoarders, Fatui. I don't think there's any miners. If they are, they're stuck.
That's like after the update. Oh yeah, there's people who are stuck down here.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot
and I think that
about
leads into the Archon side of stuff too.
Do you guys want to jump right into that then and talk a little bit about the Dainsleif storyline, or do you want to talk a little bit more about our initial travels down there?
I don't remember any of the initial stuff, so I didn't care about any of that. I was like, whatever.
It's like, let's get down in this butthole.
Give me my primos.
Yeah, give me the primos.
So let's actually jump into the Archon line then, since you brought it up, Tiff. When we get down there, at one point we run into the one, the only Dainsleif. Dun, dun, dun.
I was so excited, and now I'm not.
It was so out of nowhere. It was like, dude, what are you doing here? And it gives us an explanation that the ley lines, that when you cross over crazy tubes and stuff like that, sometimes you don't know where you're going to end up on the other side. But it just happens to be that he ends up with us.
Well, yeah, he said that he was chasing an Abyss Herald through an abyssal portal. And, you know, usually the Abyss, they can sort of, once they reach a portal, they can turn it off, basically, so you can't follow them through the exit. But that, I guess, this Abyss Herald forgot to do that, and so he was able to follow them through the portal into the Abyss. And he describes the Abyss portals as not just having an A to B exit, like entrance and exit, but that when you go into an Abyss portal, it's really a network, and that you can go out of all kinds of different exits within that network, depending on where you want to go, which is when Paimon says, like, likens that to the waypoints and how we teleport around, that they work in a similar way.
And that's really the first time we hear that, which is super interesting and exciting to know. That opened a lot of questions, I think, for us.
Yeah, because they're doing that through the Abyss, and it's like, are the waypoints using the Abyss? Or maybe they're using the Light Realm, but the Light Realm has corresponding network that sort of mirrors the Abyss one, or maybe it's just different.
Yeah.
But how are they not running into each other?
Yeah, how are they like controlling themselves like that? And we've seen the use of these abyssal portals a few times ourselves now. In the Kari Bear storyline, I think is one of the first times. And later on in the Chasm event quest with Ito and Yelan and Yanfei, we get to actually see how these like abyss portals work. And for us, it's just like kind of us walking into like the space, and then we are out of space. But I would like to know the actual mechanics behind it, besides just the graphics that they give us.
Yeah, I think it's the void. It's beyond really anything. It's if you play Honkai, it's sort of like the Sea of Quanta, or it could be, even maybe the waypoints, if they're using light energy, and they're traveling somehow via Irminsul or the ley lines, that could be likened to the imaginary tree from Honkai. Sorry, Tiff, I know you're like, fuck you.
I've completely ignored this portion of the podcast.
It's all sort of the same idea, though, is that it's just the void. It's like nothingness traveling in the space between space.
It also bears the question as to why is the Abyss in the Chasm as well? You were saying that he was following this Abyss Selector or whoever, and he ended up in the Abyss. It's like, okay, well, why was this Abyss Selector going to the Abyss
right,
as well?
So Dainsleif is immediately like, okay, so that means the Abyss is here and they're up to something. So what is it? Right. So then we go exploring, and that's when we run into the Upside Down City.
Which, when we first saw that, I totally thought we were going to fix it. I thought it was not going to be upside down anymore.
I still don't understand why it's upside down. It's very mysterious. And we see that it's sort of surrounded by the shield of abyssal energy, which Dainsleif is sort of like Shaw and like holds up his hand, and like some blue energy comes out of it, and the purple abyssal energy dissipates. And Dainsleif is like, he says something like Khaenri'ah technology, abyssal energy, it's all the same to me, just parlor tricks or something like that. And he somehow is able to dispel this like abyssal magic or abyssal energy, and likens it to like also knowing how to deal with Khaenri'ah energy, which would be light energy, by the way. So I thought that was interesting. Like, how did he learn how to do that?
Yeah, and why is the Abyss working off of light energy? Like, that seems so...
No, they're working off of the void, like the abyssal energy. But Khaenri'ah was working with light energy, which is the opposite of abyssal energy. It's the one that's like diametrically opposed to the Abyss, but it's sort of similar to it. Like, it could be both good or bad, and it's just as powerful. And we find out later that Khaenri'ah, was using light energy, and that's the energy that's powering all of their machinery, like room guards.
So when you said that they were similar, then you mean like more so how they're harnessing like their energy is similar, like how Khaenri'ah and the Abyss is harnessing it is like a similar tactic?
Yes, and that they're equal in power.
That's weird, isn't it? I don't like that. I'm not a fan of that.
Well, I mean, if Celestia is using the same energy, which I believe they are, because we find out later that Khaenri'ah, and I'm not talking about this quest, I'm talking about a different quest, but we find out that Khaenri'ah is using the same energy as Celestia to try to overturn things, which is why, they're led to disaster. But yeah, so, we already knew that the light/elemental realm was sort of diametrically opposed to the abyss/void realm, and that the human realm is sort of on top of the light elemental realm, right? So Khaenri'ah was using light energy to power its machinery, which it was going to use against Celestia, and that is sort of the opposite but equal to the abyssal energy that's being used by the Abyss Order.
Okay.
And somehow Dainsleif is able to sort of control both.
Dainsleif ain't human. I'm convinced. He's not even a Khaenri'ah anymore. He's like ascended past that.
Yeah, the bow keeper.
I mean, the whole idea that he might have been a sword too, right? But I digress. I wanted to take a backtrack to the Upside Down City too, and just say that one of the first things I thought of too was the Upside Down Barbados statue that we see.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. And I completely equated it, almost missing the fact that it was an entire city. Like I was just like, oh shit, they turned shit upside down again.
So do you think the Abyss ordered to turn the city upside down?
Well, I mean, I assumed that they turned the statue upside down. So in that moment, that was my whole kind of thinking. I don't know now, honestly. I don't know if I have an opinion one way or the other, because like it could be like some crazy trickery and like punishment from Celestia, or it's like some funky shit that the Abyss was doing and they kind of just went, oops, sorry.
Maybe the city was sort of moved into the Abyss somehow and then moved back into Teyvat. And when it moves back in, it would be upside down because, and I'm getting into some of the new Pari world quest stuff, but that's sort of like how it works, is that when things from the Abyss are sort of reflected upside down within Teyvat.
Oh.
So that could have something to do with it.
Yeah, that would definitely, that sounds more plausible. So it gets like literally moved, like that could have been in Mondstadt and then it got thrown into Liyue.
Possibly, like on a bigger, like how Dainsleif went through, I guess, a tube.
Well, I'm thinking it was already there in the chasm. I just don't know if it was always upside down. I'm assuming it was not always upside down.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because there was a civilization.
I think they made it right side up. And then when they actually came through, it was upside down because there is record that the Abyss invaded the chasm before.
Yeah, this was there, and we find out that they set up some kind of device, and like within the upside down city, and they also had put this weird abyssal shield around the city. So they were definitely like in the city messing with it. I mean, I still am very curious of, did the Abyss turn the city upside down? Is that a part of? They did it to the Statue of Seven in Mondstadt, and that was a part of their plan to like mechanize Osile or whatever. So it would make sense logically that they could somehow turn maybe this whole city upside down, and that has something to do with, their plan.
I'm surprised that we haven't asked the question, are we upside down? And it's right side up.
Well,
maybe.
That's a huge theory, right?
It is. And, it could be and it could not be. I think without the context of like, it was originally like the way it is now, was that originally how they made it, because that was how they like were right side up, I guess. It seems nonsensical to ask that question, but it is so fucking important for so many different theories. It gets very confusing.
Well, it also begs the question then, why did they bring a statue of Seven into the Abyss in that first like Dainsleif quest?
I mean, there is like a tie of Celestia to it, so maybe they were like, we can fuck with this and we can fuck with Celestia through it.
Maybe it's like they're not taking it into the Abyss. I mean, maybe it's just
getting sucked up,
using abyssal powers on it does it or something. I don't know. It's still a mystery for sure.
I would even beg to say, though, in Kari-Bear, when we see like the abyssal stuff going on there, I don't even know what to call that. The first thing all of us really think of is the upside down statue again. And it's interesting that, there's this whole theory that because the stars are a lie, we must be upside down. And that's why we can't see the sky. So the idea that maybe the human realm has, which is originally the light realm, Brandon, right? Or elemental?
Yeah, it's planted on top of the light/elemental realm.
So maybe, an idea that it somehow fell into the Abyss and now the Abyss is upside down. I don't know. But it's interesting that they keep using these upside down things. And getting to see an upside down city that really doesn't have full explanation as to why it's upside down was very intriguing. And one of you had just said that they said the Abyss kind of like onslaught the chasm and took it over. And so that also bears the question of, was there ever a civilization down there to begin with? Or is that just the way the Abyss built their home? If the Abyss just built their home that way, like maybe they're like bats. I don't know. They just live upside down.
What if, this has no evidence, but I just thought of it. What if this is a piece of Khaenri'ah that was touched by abyssal magic or abyssal energy and just was flipped because that's what abyssal shit does?
Well, Dainsleif tells us that looking at the architecture of the city, that it looks like it's from a civilization much older than Khaenri'ah, although it does look similar to the architecture used in Khaenri'ah. So to me, it makes it seem like this is an ancient civilization. Maybe it is a part of the ancient unified civilization that existed before the second who came, which would include Enkanomiya before it fell into the sea.
It would include Enkanomiya, Salvin Dagner, but it would also include Khaenri'ah because they're the oldest civilizations that predate the fight of the Primordial One and the second one who came.
Well, I have a theory that Khaenri'ah came right at the end, started at the end of Salvin Dagner and Enkanomiya.
Ooh.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that just because it's pretty evident that Khaenri'ah is not the oldest.
No, definitely not the oldest.
I would even dare to say that only Enkanomiya was around for the first versus second fight. Because Salvin Dagner, they seem to be around when Mondstadt was around. And I don't know, just the way that they talk about Mondstadt lore at the same time.
So I want to get into that because when we did our Dragonspine episode, that was our thought, was that Salvin Dagner was sort of seeking, they were, the actual verbiage says that they were seeking refuge from a land of snow and strife. So we all assume that that means that they were coming from the time of the war between Decarabian and Andrias, where Andrias was like freezing everything and Decarabian had this like shield of storms blocking the ice and snow out. And so we assume that this was like people from that area that left Decarabian's rule, like his tyrannical rule, and went to seek refuge somewhere else, and they stumbled upon this wonderful mountain that was free of all the ice. But when I was looking into this today, I was made aware of these artifacts called prayers for illumination, prayers for destiny, and prayers to springtime. And these artifacts talk about a time when humans received revelations directly from heaven, and that the heaven had envoys that walked among humans. And within these artifacts, it talks about the thawing of eternal ice at a time when the first fires started. And so it's very ancient, and at a time obviously when humans were still in direct contact with these envoys from heaven, which we can guess is Celestia, right? So what if Salvin Dagner wasn't from this Decarabian Andrias place? What if they were way older than that and they were actually some of the first humans to walk to that?
Ooh, kind of like Ice Age shit.
Right. And then they find this mountain that was very ideal in terms of weather and everything, and a great place for them to live. And I believe there's also lore out there that says that Celestia used to be sort of stationed right above Dragonspine.
Ooh.
And then, eventually they get skynailed. And then the mountain freezes.
So are we suggesting then that Dragonspine is the first place that a Skynail ever existed?
No, I think all the Skynails came down at the same time.
Oh, really?
I wonder if they make a particular design.
I will say that I've kind of had this thought in my head that Celestia dropped them one at a time, which totally could be wrong, right? But I also feel like the closer we're getting to Snezhnaya, the closer we get to Celestia. And people are saying that that's because Celestia is going to have its own place on the map, and that just happens to be where it is. But I feel like they're getting closer and closer to Celestia because they know what the Saritz is up to, and they're ready to fuck shit up over there. And, I think we talked a while back about how there's possibility of a Skynail coming to Inazuma potentially, because the Ryan Shogun broke some of the heavenly principles from what we can quote unquote assume by trying to change the standard, the status quo of humanity, basically by trying to figure out eternity. That's probably not good for the heavenly principles. But it makes me wonder if they are aware that the Saritz is fucking up and they're going to drop a Skynail on them. Otherwise, it'd be interesting to know if all the Skynails did fall at once, because are they about to drop several more?
I was just wondering, in your theory, do they drive Celestia around
oh, hell yeah, that's a spaceship. I've already That's they keep talking about spaceships. I think that's a spaceship at this rate.
So wait, was Xingqiu onto something with the Legend of the Sword? He knows all the space stuff.
Yes.
Well, I think the spaceship is the second who came.
Oh.
And I do think that that could have influenced A Legend of Sword, because I think the second who came. So I guess let's back up and talk about the origin of the chasm and what created it. So we know that according to volume 6 of the records of Zhuiyun, which is this book series in Liyue, that the chasm was created by a falling star.
Would you like me to read the passage?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. In a past beyond memory, when even Rex Lapis would still have been young, a star fell from the sky into the barren plains west of Liyue. These plains were transformed into a huge and deep chasm in the wake of that star's descent, and jade would emerge from within, beautiful and limitless. It would become the foundation of 1,000 years of industrial mining in Liyue thereafter. There's also some idea that it's a sentient mechanical thing.
Yeah, that's a part of that legend. Now, this sort of matches the same myth from the Solar Relic artifact in the Vermilion Hereafter set that talks about, we went over this in a previous episode, but this is the one that talks about the sun chariot falling from the sky after the Moon Sisters died. And that, this was also mentioned to be when Zhongli was young. So we know that Zhongli is around 6,000 years old. So that means that this falling star created the chasm around 6,000 years ago. The records of Zhuiyun also state that during the Archon War, which was roughly 2,000 to maybe 2,600 years ago, that during that time, this star that had fallen and created the chasm leapt back up towards the sky. So this is happening 6,000 years ago that it falls. So my thought is that this could be the second who came, and that it could also be a spaceship, because the sun chariot myth talks about these mountain tribes people repairing it,
right?
And that's when it returned to its westward cycle. So maybe it getting repaired is what allowed it to leap back up into the sky. And that makes sense if it's a spaceship, because they had to fix it. But that also means that it crashed and that it stuck around in Teyvat for around 4,000 years before it was repaired.
So here's my question. Do you think that the second who came is in charge of Celestia? I asked that because one of the big theories about the chasm is that the star was Celestia that fell. Because if you look at the bottom of Celestia, and we're squinting, right, pulling out our binoculars, looking at it from Teyvat, but it does have a similar shape to the chasm. So I read a lot of theories that say that Celestia is what fell to the ground. And so it'd be interesting if the second who came crash landed his spaceship in Teyvat in the chasm and created the chasm. And then he eventually left when the Archon War started and kind of took up his throne in Celestia and knighted his 7 Archons that came out victorious and kind of was y'all are in charge now. Be gone.
Maybe. That's an interesting theory.
I do really love this theory, though. Because it would explain the sudden, the Primordial One is seen as a very benevolent god. They defeated the 7 Dragon Lords, but didn't kill them. And once we have the fight, all of a sudden they're throwing sky nails. That's not benevolent. That's completely out of character.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear in some other lore that we'll get to in a minute that it was the Primordial One who threw down the nails and was threatened by what was happening to the world because of the second who came.
The whole idea of the spaceship thing just kind of bothers my mind, because for some reason, every time we talk about the sun chariot and the moon goddesses and all that kind of stuff, I immediately see, and I might be aging myself here, I immediately see the artwork that's a part of Smashing Pumpkins' Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. And it's I just see the little guy on an old timey bike, and then to put a spaceship in it, you just kind of blew my mind. It's not working.
Oh no.
What's actually interesting about that is that Okay, so when our initial discourse between Honkai and Genshin started in our like group of friends, and for travelers, we have a group of friends and there's a large debate over Honkai versus Genshin. And by that, I mean Tiff and I are like, fuck Honkai Impact the third, boo. And everyone else is like, just try it. And me and Tiff are like, no. One of the big reasons I think both of us said we weren't a fan of Honkai Impact the third was of how robot-y it was and techy, and something that's really fun about Genshin is that it's very magical. It's very mystical, you know, it's about gods. There's magical powers from visions, much more fantasy based.
Yeah, than instead of the sci-fi side of Honkai.
So hearing like spaceship, it's a weird throw, like when you're thinking about lore of this game and thinking that like there are spaceships. Like Celestia could literally just be like an island in the sky. It could be another planet. It could be a moon, but now it could also be a spaceship. Like for some reason that doesn't seem as plausible unless you start to bring in like that the Honkai is tied in theories. Like if you had never played Honkai, you would never think that a spaceship could be up in the sky or that a spaceship crash landed. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, if you read A Legend of Sword, you would.
Well, but even when we had our Xingqiu episode where we all like, it's so weird that he wrote about space.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, as humans, I've always been obsessed with the idea of space. The second we see birds, we're like, I want to fly. And we eventually got there. Who says we couldn't do it again?
I do want to just say a few more quick things about my whole, like, why I think it's Celestia that crashed and created the chasm. And I can't say for sure, obviously, because I think what Brandon said has a lot more canon to it because it is lore that we actually hear. You know, it's like we read that, right? That the sun chariot crashed and everything happened. So there is more of a possibility that it's canon. Of course, we also learned last week during the Yae Publishing House episode and also during our Nahida storylines that we seem to write things down that aren't necessarily the most linear when applied to real life. So we could be making a more fantasy version up to please the readers and defy something in Irminsul.
I mean, I think it's absolutely possible that it was Celestia that created the chasm, because I think that what could have happened was Celestia was in the sky and maybe was even, you know, sort of like the solar palace that is sort of equal to the lunar palace that we know about, and that it was sort of floating around and maybe people thought it was the sun, and that the second who came showed up somehow, we don't know how, but that when all of this disaster happened because of the war between the Primordial One and the second who came, then at that point Celestia crashes down and takes care of business, dropping the sky nails and like getting rid of all of the people and doing whatever they need to do. And then by the time that sort of things are repopulating and we're getting to the time of the Archon War, that's when they sort of lift back up into the sky. And they're like, okay, now I have my Archons in place. They're, you know, communicating, like I gave them their gnosis. They're going to like be my eyes on the ground and I can go back up into the air. Like it makes total sense that it was Celestia.
Well, a few more little random nodes to just hammer it in or sky nail it in a little deeper. And this is where we're going to find some really niche lore. So like, you know, travelers, don't kill me. It's fine. But as most people know, I'm a big Albedo fan. I hope you all know that by now if you're listening. I love Albedo. And as we all know, Albedo has a sword called the Cinnabar Spindle. The Cinnabar Spindle is said to be a sword made from materials that do not belong in this world. The power within the sword might even be able to withstand the corruption of a venom that could corrode a mighty dragon. Now, the latter half is definitely pointing to the whole, like, Albedo's gonna get corrupted by Durin one day, just like Durin, or even corrupted by gold one day, just like Durin was corrupted by her. So, you know, great. Very much not looking forward to that storyline. But it begs the question of how this sword is made of a material that does not belong in this world when there is a Cinnabar cliff located in the chasm. And the Cinnabar cliff is actually considered a tourist spot, although people rarely go there. So I don't know what type of tourist spot that is, but it is a tourist. It's like saying the trash cans in Star Rail are a tourist spot.
I mean, we all love the trash. I would say, to explain Cinnabar, it comes from cinnabrite, which is an actual sulfide mineral that we find here on our planet.
Yeah, it's a part of Mercury.
Which is probably why they're like, yo, this is kind of deadly, because it's Ooh. But it could have been attached to the sun chariot. Maybe some residue came off it, and that's somehow it became Cinnabrite.
Well, give me a second. So basically, what we find out is that Cinnabar IRL in real life is this actual bright red mineral, like Al just said, that's Cinnabrite, and it has something to do with mercury. It either helps create the form of mercury that we know today, something like that, something with the chemical composition.
It creates mercury sulfide, which is like mercury and sulfur.
But it's also very well associated with volcanic eruption and hot springs, but sulfuric hot springs. I find that interesting because I would assume if something crashed down into the chasm, as we're guessing, it would be pretty fucking hot. And might even equate out to a volcanic eruption. And if you go from there, they say that the word cinnabar actually comes from the Greek word kinnabari. And I thought that was really interesting because Al has mentioned before that Celestia has a lot of like Greek influence to it from what we know about it. And a lot of the lore, it tends to be more Greek surrounding Celestia in general. So I am very curious if when Celestia possibly crash landed into what is now the chasm, if they left behind some ore that is not of this world, if the crash itself created Cinnabar. It's also interesting because Hu Tao's weapon, the Staff of Homa, while it doesn't say anything about Cinnabar in it until you get to her attack, and it's called Reckless Cinnabar. But there's really no explanation that relates it back to Cinnabar at all. And I couldn't find anything, not in her weapon description, not in her description. You know, it said that her staff was probably used, like has a sort of power in it that helps her like pass people on to the afterlife when they're assuming there was like a really bad plague of people getting sick in Liyue because of the corruption that the Yakshas cause, kind of like that dark magic that Zhao was always fighting off.
Mm-hmm.
There is an assumption that this staff that she uses was created by her like great ancestors to help people suffering from this like plague of darkness move on to the next world. Maybe you can only do that if you got out of this world materials. I don't know. I really don't know how her stuff relates back to this Reckless Cinnabar. And the Cinnahome is definitely not related to it. If the Cinnahome is my favorite place in the chasm, I made up that name. It's just like the house in the middle where that guy tries to fight you if you've done the quest. But yeah, that's just kind of my little like, I feel like definitely something out of this world, which could be also not Celestia. I think there's a lot of things that could have crash landed and not been of this world that could have like left some Cinnabar behind. So I'm not 100% sure, but that really to me pushes the theory a little bit further.
Yeah, and it could also have just actually been the fake sun in the sky that just fell out of the sky and then they fixed it and put it back up in the sky, you know?
Yes, exactly.
So it could be the sun too.
Maybe it was a moon sister. It literally could be fucking anything.
But backing up to where we were with the Upside Down City and talk a little bit about the curse, the Khaenri'ah curse, because that's sort of what the whole Dainsleif quest is sort of centered around.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, you know, we find out that our Abyss twin is trying to use this fountain in the Upside Down City that seems to ease the curse or sort of try to cleanse the curse in a way, even though Dainsleif, you know, declares that there's absolutely no fully getting rid of it. We find out that, you know, Hillitrolls are coming into the chasm when they're so far eroded that they can't really continue living. And they go there because it's comforting, because this energy that's within this Upside Down City eases their curse and makes them feel better. And so we find out that our Abyss twin is trying to use this magical fountain in the city along with this abyssal amplification device to transmit something that will hopefully cure or reverse the curse and change all the Hillitrolls back into people so that they can rebuild the kingdom of Khaenri'ah and, you know, a stand against Celestia again. And Dainsleif is like, no, this is going to cause them so much more suffering and there's no chance that it'll work. We have to stop them. And then, you know, we meet Halfdan, who sort of saves the day at the end of it by throwing himself on top of the amplification device. And we basically ruin their plans and stop that from happening.
As we should.
Well, maybe.
Because maybe, who knows? Like maybe it would have actually worked, depending on which which twin you're on the side of, you know?
Yeah. The more we learn, the more you kind of feel for Abyss Twin, because we know that they're just trying to get rid of the curse, because all of these Hillitrolls, you know, they used to be people in Khaenri'ah, and they became these monsters. They're all like living tortured lives, and they're also all immortals, essentially. So they're being tortured forever. And our twin is trying to ease their pain, but I guess, and you know, our twin says, even if there's a 1% chance that it'll work, we have to try it. But then on the flip side, Dainsleif is like, there's less than a 1% chance that this will work, and that it's actually going to inflict a lot of extra suffering, which I guess we don't know for sure if our twin knew that it would cause suffering.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, this is when we first find out, though, that the Hillitrolls are actual people from Khaenri'ah, right? Like, we just never knew what they were.
No. I think we found that out before the chasm. I don't remember exactly when. Amanda, do you remember when we find out about the Khaenri'ah curse? Because I know that when Dainsleif shows up, he starts talking about the curse, and Paimon's like, oh yeah, you mentioned that, you know, the people were cursed. But I'm like, I don't remember when we find out.
So I think we find out that Dainsleif is cursed back in Mondstadt, but we don't find out the Hillitrolls are humans, basically, until the chasm. Because the joke is like, before doing the chasm, fuck you, Hillitroll. And then after the chasm, oh, I'm so sorry, I have to kill you. So we definitely find out in that moment that Abyss Mages and Hillitrolls are people. It's definitely in the chasm. We know that there was a curse.
Maybe I just fast forwarded it too much when I was rewatching the quest on YouTube. So then, yeah, you're right, Tiff. I think I just watched the video in a weird place that made it seem like we already knew.
Because that was like the huge lore drop, I think, in the chasm, was that the Hillitrolls used to be people.
Yeah.
And I think, too, they lead us on really well, because we find out Dainsleif is cursed. He's like, the people of Khaenri'ah are cursed, like in Mondstadt. And we're like, oh, okay. Like, are they all like you? We all just assume that they're like cursed to live forever, and that's when all like the Kaya stuff starts to get questioned, because we're like, oh well, has Kaya been this age his whole life then? What's going on? But then we find out that they're all Hillitrolls, and we're like, wait, so how is Kaya cursed? But then we find out in Khaenri'ah.
Yes, so we find out in the chasm that the citizens of Khaenri'ah were cursed, and that they are the Hillitrolls and the Abyss Mages, etc.
Then every time you go to kill them, you go, wait, I don't want to kill the cursed poor people who are all hurting.
But according to Dainsleif, you know, he's very adamant that there is no humanity left in them. So that, you know, he's like, don't be fooled by your emotions. Like, these are not people anymore. Whereas our twin is very much on the side of, no, they are people. They're citizens of Khaenri'ah, and we have to save them somehow.
And, well, spoiler alert to anybody who didn't do Khaenri'ah, so give it a second. Okay, we know that our twin is right based on Khaenri'ah, because we know that kid is inside the Hillitroll. Like, he's really...
But that was hundreds of years ago.
So you think by now they just kind of turned into little, like, walnuts?
Yeah, all I could think of was walnuts. I was like, walnut.
You know, little nut inside a big shell. This is just...
I feel like from what we've learned from Dainsleif is that they are, like, eroding away on the inside the longer that they are Hillitrolls.
Oh.
So I feel like that's why there's so many Hillitrolls, like, in the chasm, trying to find that source of, like, the calm power that Brandon was talking about.
Because they've been alive for 500 years now.
Yeah. I'm almost, like, surprised that there aren't more in the chasm, but I think the Pari quest line answers some of those questions.
Does that bring in the other Hillitrolls, the multicolor Hillitroll, the big guys?
Yeah.
Okay. I haven't done that part yet.
But the new world quest, the new Pari world quest featuring Sarush, our little floaty companion, that's not Paimon.
Boo.
That drops so much lore about Khaenri'ah, including you get to find the entrance to Khaenri'ah. That whets anyone's appetite.
Ooh.
But we find out during that quest that the Khaenri'ahns were rejected by the laws of this world and cursed. So it kind of makes it seem like the reason that they're cursed is they are rejected by the laws placed by the Primordial One on this world, maybe even like upon the creation of it, which I thought was really strange. And, you know, I guess we can get more into that, into what the curse is at a later time. But we do know that they were rejected by the laws of this world during the cataclysm. We also know that light energy this is where we find out, how powerful light energy is, that it's just as powerful as abyssal energy, and that Khaenri'ah was using this energy and its machinery to try to tear open the edges of the false world and reveal the truth. And, could it be that Khaenri'ah learned how to do this from this ancient unified civilization that we talked about, like in Khaenri'ah from before the fall, and that maybe that's why this area is attracting all of these eroded Hillitrolls, and it's easing their curse because it's using the light energy that was manipulated by the civilization to protect people from the abyss. Because light energy is so powerful, it's sort of equal to but opposite abyssal energy, so it could even potentially corrupt. But it seems like the ancient civilization and or Khaenri'ah learned how to manipulate it in a way that it gets along well with humanity. This might have happened as part of the deal that was made between the elemental light realm and the Primordial One, when the Primordial One was first establishing human and setting up the world for humanity, that they had to figure out how to make this light energy work with the human realm. So this technology sort of existed already, and Khaenri'ah figured out how to use it. And that also kind of makes sense that this upside down city is similar to Khaenri'ah, but it's from a more ancient civilization. That maybe Khaenri'ah took things from the civilization and used it to build their nation, including that technology of this light energy, which they use to power all of these insane machines. Also, the Teyvat flower that we run into in the chasm during the Dainsleif quest, that is the same flower that Lumine has in her hair, and it's the national flower of Khaenri'ah. We find out that only blooms normally for 2 weeks before wilting, but if you take it out of Khaenri'ah, the flowers turn, like the petals of the flower turn hard, and it sort of becomes immortal. But then once you take it back to the home soil, the flower then continues to wilt and turns to dust. And that made me think, like, could that mean that maybe just the easiest way to get rid of the curses for all these Hillitrolls to just go back to Khaenri'ah?
Wait, it sounds like
if they return to their home soil, will they just turn into dust and finally die?
Well, isn't there something that says the curse doesn't affect them unless they leave from underground Khaenri'ah?
Yeah, we find that out also during the new Pare World Quest, that when the cataclysm happened, they were cursed, quote unquote, but none of them turned into these Hillitrolls or these monsters until they left Khaenri'ah and went to the surface. That's when the curse kicks in. You find notes from people in the New World Quest that chose to stay underground near Khaenri'ah, even though there were monsters pouring out of it. Most people were fleeing for their lives, and then once they get to the surface, they turn into monsters themselves. But then once some of the citizens that were fleeing found this out, some of them started staying back. So they were getting slaughtered by monsters or hiding or whatever, but they would only turn into the Hillitrolls and the monsters once they left Khaenri'ah, which means for some reason, Khaenri'ahs were rejected by the laws of this world. And it's almost like, since they weren't a part of those laws, once they crossed some kind of threshold, then that curse, whatever the curse is, kicked in.
So fucking wild. Honestly, so sad.
Now, where does the unusual Hillitroll come into this? Because that's really all I care about.
He was once a businessman. In fact, he was a lawyer.
He was a freaking good businessman. He's still carrying around that briefcase.
You know what? His firm went under. And when that happins,
he's just like, hey, I still gotta work. You bitches over here just laying around.
I mean, they're definitely anomalies. Because Halfdan, he kept a lot of his sort of memories, even though he turned into a Black Serpent Knight.
Right. Before we jump into exactly what the Serpent Knights are, because I think that's actually really important, I did want to just say, back to the flower, we do see that one flower on the ground, the one that's from Khaenri'ah that Lumine has in her hair, which first off pissed me the fuck off, because it's just insinuating again that Ether is really supposed to be the traveler, and I hate that. I just hate that they were like, oh, we're gonna make this really pick your poison type of thing, and they really didn't. Poor Lumine gets the short end of the stick the entire time. She's never been featured in any of the event art or anything like that. It's very frustrating for me.
Yeah.
But that put aside, when we touch that flower, don't we see the memory of our sibling?
Yes.
And that is very curious to me, because it ties back back to the Aranara. And when we talk about the Aranara, one of the big things we mentioned is that they can store their memories in flowers.
Once Dainsleif and Paimon realize that Traveler's sort of in a daze having this memory and seeing this image, and we tell them what we saw, Dainsleif says something like, well, they do say twins have a special connection. And the way that he says it that really started, I think, the theory for me in my head that like there's something more to the connection between Ether and Lumine, where I know we have a lot of theories and speculation of like the world is like in a cycle and like the twins are taking turns being the Abyss Mage and like they're sharing each other's memories, or like, you know, one twin is actually the soul of the other twin or something. Like it sort of sparked that kind of, there's something more going on. And then, you know, once we got to Caribert, it was like, okay, something's going on here where we're like living our memory, the memories of our twin.
Yeah, absolutely. But I did think that was interesting. And we do find out through Caribert that our siblings spent some time in Sumeru, and that the Aranara, we also find out that like they knew him or her, whoever it is. So I do wonder if like they picked up on some like, I'm going to leave my memory in this flower, because they knew we were going to come down this path. They know everything we're doing.
Yeah.
It makes me curious that they were purposely leaving little clues for us to find too.
Oh yeah, I definitely think so.
But that brings us to the Serpent Knight.
Yeah, so the Black Serpent Knights were the royal guard of Khaenri'ah, and we find out during this quest that Dainsleif is the captain of the royal guards. So that was a fun bit of lore. I think it's interesting that they're called the Black Serpent Knights because there's a whole motif and a bunch of lore about a serpent in the abyss, which is also something that this game has in common with Honkai Impact. Sorry, but it does. So yeah, there's this whole thing with this serpent. Also remember back in the manga when sweet baby Kale first comes to Mondstadt and she uses her weird powers. There's like a weird snake that is manifested that kills people.
At the Battle Pass cutscene too, there's a black snake, a black serpent that clutches the pearl.
Isn't it like wrapping itself around the...
Yes, which I have a connection with, if you will, but continue.
So I just wanted to also get into the oozing filth versus the Skynail in the chasm that is sort of a part of this quest where, you know, we're running around the chasm, the depths of the chasm with like collecting lumen spar, which we use in our lumenstone adjuvant thing. And we're using that to cleanse these clumps of oozing filth, which we find out later that oozing filth is just sort of forbidden knowledge. That's what forbidden knowledge kind of turned into in the chasm.
And when it spills out of its little container.
Yeah.
Spoils.
And we find out one interesting is in the second Nahida story quest, there's this grounded geoshroom that Nahida had once protected, and she actually tasked this mushroom thing to guard a memory involving the Dendro sovereign Apep, and that this geoshroom that was sent to the chasm to protect this memory because Nahida knew that her memory would probably get removed. So he's guarding this in the chasm, and that he says that he had to use the Skynail in the chasm to change the form of the forbidden knowledge. So it's interesting that the Skynail is able to do that. But then as I looked more into it, I was learning more like, oh, we actually know really why the Skynails were sent, and that's because of some new Sumeru things that were given to us in the lore. And I was kind of shocked when I was looking into this because I feel like it took several floating lore bits that we've all talked about and kind of brought them together. And I feel like we're finally able to start putting some of these pieces together to build the history of what happened in Teyvat. But the Skynail's purpose, it definitely seems to be about protecting the world from forbidden knowledge. And there's a weapon called the Staff of the Scarlet Sands, which was basically King Desheret's weapon. The description of it is from his point of view. And part of that says that in the original world, the barriers were torn down and the dark poison had penetrated the earth. To heal that fragile, sad, and imperfect world, the spikes descended and pierced through the earth's crust. And then in the Amethyst Crown, which is an artifact in the Flowers of Paradise Lost set, that is described from the point of view of the goddess of flowers. Now, we're going to get into this in more detail later in the season when we do our Gods of the Desert episode, but I just wanted to briefly get into this. The goddess of flowers we know that she is allegedly a surviving Seelie.
Right.
So this amethyst crown in the Flowers of Paradise Lost says, it was a faraway time of calm and peace. Divine envoys spoke openly with the people then, bringing them the word from the heavens, which I just talked about that earlier, these divine envoys and the time of like the early humans of Teyvat.
Mhm.
But in time, invaders descended from beyond the firmament, bringing with them destruction, overturning rivers, spreading plagues. So I'm thinking that's the second who came, right? And although the invaders brought war to my former kin, notice she says my former kin, they also brought about illusions that could break through shackles to the land. But the master of the heavens, consumed by fear for the rising tide of delusion and breakthroughs, sent down the divine nails to mend the land, laying waste to the mortal realm. When we then suffered the torment of exile, stripped was our connection to heaven, to our powers of enlightenment. So this blew my mind because to me, this is saying that it's sort of laying it all out. You have the Primordial One who made the human realm and unleashed humanity onto Teyvat, right? Then you have these divine envoys who are basically, representatives of Celestia and talking to the people, the early humans, and guiding them. What does guiding humans remind you of? Seelies.
Right.
And we know that the goddess of flowers is allegedly a Seelie. So that makes me think that the Seelies were the divine envoys, which means that the Seelies were under the Primordial One. They were like the Primordial One's helpers. They are a part of Celestia. She says that, the invaders brought war to my former kin. They also brought about illusions that could break through shackles to the land. I think that the second who came showed up and they started telling the truth about the world to the humans, and the humans were kind of like, wait, so our world is fake? All of this stuff isn't actually real? And they started questioning Celestia and the gods. And my theory is that one of the Seelies took the sides of the humans, and that's sort of like the marriage of the Seelie and the human. So, I mean, the Primordial One in Celestia was like, okay, like the world is about to crumble and get just like what King Deshret was saying, that the barriers were torn down, the dark poison had penetrated the earth, blah, blah, blah. So that was happening, like everything was falling apart because people were suddenly questioning their reality. And so to fix that, the Primordial One sends down the Sky Nails, which wipes out most of humanity. So we're talking, this is like when Khaenri'ah sinks into the sea. This is when Salvin Dagner gets frozen and they all die out. And this is when the Seelies get exiled. And this is all happening at the same time, which means that this was all happening around 6,000 years ago, which had to have been when the second who came sort of showed up and went to war with the Primordial One.
Why was Teyvat in utter chaos?
Because of the second who came.
Well, I just mean like can you imagine? Like, I feel like Teyvat's in chaos right now.
Yeah, I think this even kind of goes into more of why we need that. Like, we need to see a linear timeline at some point, so we can kind of see how all these things kind of go on at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
You ready to make that? Because we can have a PowerPoint presentation.
Absolutely.
Let's do it. We know at least it begins with the Dragon Lords in the elemental plane, and it ends with when we wake up.
But do we know that? It could start in
No, we don't!
I will say earlier,
Honkai Sai.
we keep notes, travelers, of like what we want to talk about, so everyone has an idea of like what our main talking points are. And I was in the Google Doc, and so was Brandon, and he was typing something about like maybe this is what caused like the Chasm's creation. I went, or the Astral Express crashed into Teyvat. And then I got yelled at to get out of his notes.
Get out of my notes. The only other thing I wanted to mention with the timeline is that this was all happening 6,000 years ago. If it's true that Salvin Dagner is that old and they were among the first humans, we know that because of the description of the scribe's box in Dragonspine, that the scribe, I believe, is the last survivor of Salvin Dagner. Like everyone else, I think, died before him. And he mentions in the description of that he had heard of people building a nation without gods. So that to me implies that maybe Khaenri'ah was first coming into being at that time. I'm thinking that the Khaenri'ahs were inspired by the second who came sort of spilling all this tea about the truth of the world and the fake sky and all of that. So that's when they sort of, fled underground and created their own nation, and it started learning what they are using what they had learned to try to come up with a plan to combat Celestia.
That makes sense. Also, though, wasn't Khaenri'ah originally like a godless land? Like Istaroth would check in on them every now and then, but stopped. And Urabashi eventually became their god, but weren't they also godless originally? So I wonder if Salvanir could also be thinking of Khaenri'ah.
I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll get into that in our next episode. Which will be about Khaenri'ah, but I do know that when they tried to come back up, that they were somehow blocked from doing so, and so they weren't sure who won the war between the Primordial One and the second who came. But yeah, I don't remember. I'm gonna have to wait till I research it to figure out if they were like following a god or anything.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to know too, because I think that'll it just makes the lore even trickier if they were godless at first, right?
Right.
Like they really don't want us to know when shit started. It's also crazy how much of the Chasm lore really ties into the overarching lore of the world. I know we've mainly talked about the relations back to Khaenri'ah, but it is really interesting. We learn a lot. I'm going to speed run a few things, but just like we know that Azdaha used to live in the chasm. We know that eventually, all these demons and monsters start coming out of the chasm during the cataclysm, which leads us down the whole missing Yaksha storyline that we talked about in our Zhao episode, and also reminds us about the fantastic compass that was down there. We also still don't know what happened to Jishuang, if she survived or not, if she's alive. We have that mushroom down there that talks to us, which was really our first inkling into what Sumeru was gonna be like.
Mm-hmm. I feel like Jishuang is alive, by the way. She's too stubborn to die. That's
good, because the last we heard from her, she left us a note saying that she was going to go ahead and travel further down this path, and then when we go to search for the path, it's not there. And I feel like we should have a little bit more faith in her because she is a cartographer, much like Mika, which I'm like, oh my god, I wonder if they know each other. But she's, I guess, Leeway Adventures Guild. And because Mika does not have a voice line about other cartographers, I look.
Maybe she found a way into Khaenri'ah.
Maybe. It's also interesting because all of our viewpoints in the chasm, which are like those purple things you can go over and click and they show you like a photo when you're traveling, all the chasm viewpoints are written in her perspective. So I can't remember where we actually went with her versus where we didn't. So it's like, oh, was she already here? Maybe we'll find her in Sumeru. Maybe someone there will help her. Maybe Tinyari's helping her. We don't know. And on top of that, too, with the chasm, we also meet a ton of other people down there. We have our super high miner with his very red eyes, and we find out that he's been eating the magic mushrooms, basically. We also meet Ekaterina.
It's Ekaterina.
We meet Ekaterina. We meet a Fatui Electro-Assistant mage who has a lot of backstory on what the Fatui are doing down there, and she's trying to find her brother, and we find out that her brother is probably dead, which was there was a lot of Fatui lore down there. We actually met a whole bunch of Fatui guys who were telling us all about what they were doing down there, and they seem to be stuck in like a weird time loop as well. But yeah, there's a lot going on in the chasm, and I don't think we really have enough time to cover all those things in as much detail.
Aww. Can I do the quick hidden shit?
Yeah, go ahead. What do you want to mention?
All right, so there's the quest called the Orb of Blue Depths. DEPTHS, and that's when you fight all these serpent knights with a bunch of different names, and they give you these purple pearls, and it's like, I thought this was the Orbs of Blue Depths. Well, actually, they might be fogged over with abyssal corruption, and they're originally blue. Are they the Genesis Pearl? We don't know, but if you get all 9, because yes, it's 9, you get to a secret room that has a letter that in everyone's world, it is different to what line is legible, but it translates as not as if I were to be outfitted as the guardian of Khaenri'ah, not as if my destructive self was made to be the liar of Barbados, not as if I were to soar like Pegasus, not if I were the swift snow-white pair of Morpheus. Add these to the feather-footed and the winged, and likewise call for the swiftness of the winds. And though you should harness these, friend, and offer them to me, yet I should be tired to the bone and worn away by frequent faintness. My friend, while I would search for you, the heavens fall to pieces and falsehoods collapse. Pretty fucking cool.
I can't believe it changes every time. Well, I mean, it changes for each person. Yeah.
Yes. So like each line, because all of it, like if I were to be outfitted as that guardian of Khaenri'ah, you can't read it if you're in someone's world and they might have, yet I would be tired to the bone and worn away by quite frequent faintness. It's really cool. And if you notice all the glowy shit on the walls, you can translate that into Latin, which you can then detranslate, and let me know what you think it really is trying to say.
Like, what do you think it's trying to say?
Well, so two people, and this is all from Reddit. We'll put the link on the page. But all these texts translate, and one person put them in this order. The dweller in heaven sends the thorns, for the way of the abyss is not to be. Faithful Eagle and Egel and growing Agnar bewail the dead. Call on the living in shadows to prevent the shedding of tears. But some people have translated it this way. The dwellers in heaven use the thorns to pass judgment. I see your tears. I too mourn the dead. But if you do not wish to become like them, this pious Egel calls upon the living to go into the depths and shadows. But everything that's abyssal can be directly ciphered into Latin, which we then can translate. So this just means what more is hidden.
Right. And it's true.
I love the letter, not as if I were to be outfitted as that guardian of Khaenri'ah.
Which, here's the thing. It's basically Genshin's twist on a Roman poem called Catalyst 58b. Catalyst is a Roman poet from like 84 to 50 BCE, so very ancient. But his original poem is read, he is not a guardian if he imagines Kratos, not if Pegasus were carried by flight. I am not Ladas, but Perseus, not Rhesus, Snow and the city team add to this Plumpitis and the flying ones and the winds the same trace their course, which teams of the Khaenri'ah would you tell me? But he was tired of all his bones and perished with many diseases. I was looking for you as my friend.
This is so sad because I feel like the abyssal, because it's a letter that's written in abyssal, right?
It's written by someone of the abyss to someone who is not of the abyss, but can read abyssal, which we know Sumerian is its own specific language and lettering because we see it in Sumeru and we see it with Alhatham's, swingy attack swords. And abyssal is very different. Maybe abyssal has a root in Khaenri'ah writing, and maybe they're writing to the people of Khaenri'ah. I don't know. It's really interesting, and I really want to learn more about Catalyst or Catullus. It's Catullus. Cataclysy? Catullus, probably. I want to really go into that poem.
I really love the letter, though. It's so beautiful, and it is. It makes me wonder who wrote it. It seems like it was written during the cataclysm because they're talking about the heavens fall to pieces and falsehoods collapse.
And it's very much like someone's like, I'm not up high and mighty. I'm not like a chosen one. I'm here just trying to do what I can for the people I love.
Outfitted as that guardian of Khaenri'ah, sort of like jealous of Dainsleif or something.
Yeah. He's like, I'm trying to do what I can, but I'm so tired. I can't do it anymore. And the fact that it's all these orbs you get to unlock this room is from 9 serpent nights. Something about it is so tragic, and in a way it's like they wanted to do everything that they could to help their people.
It also makes me...
It's just so sad. Anyway.
What makes me wonder if it is a night or something of Khaenri'ah, and if those nights if there was like another entrance to Khaenri'ah in the chasm that they were coming out of. Because we know from the Missing Yaksha storyline that Zhao's now dead Yakshabud and Yalan's ancestor were like guarding the chasm together, and they didn't see any like not monsters there. You know, they didn't see normal people down there. So it's interesting that there is a note from like a possible person from Khaenri'ah, like just like vibing around. I almost wonder if it, you know, I think I had this talk with Brandon recently, and I could be wrong, so if it wasn't you, B, let me know, where we were saying that maybe Dainsleif isn't real. Like he's like all figments of our imagination, and I wonder if Dainsleif is dead and he wrote that note.
What?
Oh my.
We're just seeing a ghost.
Well, it's possible. I'm just saying it's possible.
Does anybody else ever talk to him, or is it just
Paimon.
us?
And Kaya.
We did have that beer.
Oh, yes, we did. Well, yeah, and the bartender there didn't speak directly to him. Kaya had ordered.
But he is skittish about other people. I mean, we meet him at, I guess, the bar in Mondstadt, but remember, he like didn't want to go to the church when we go to talk to Babs.
Maybe because he would bust out into flames.
Yeah.
You're gonna say bust out into song.
Maybe that too. I mean, he might
doing a dance. He's like, I'm Dainsleif. He's got like a top hat on. He's like,
Barbara joins in.
Dainsleif, I'm dead, and I'm gonna fuck your shit up.
every time he shows up, and on fucking shit up note, I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, travelers, for coming with us into the chasm and beyond. Wow, I feel like we were in Khaenri'ah even at this rate. If you liked what you heard today and you want to hear more, you want to give us some feedback on what we talked about today, you can feel free to follow us on Tales of Teyvat Pod on Instagram or Tales of Teyvat on Twitter. You can also feel free to send us an email, talesoftevatpod@gmail.com, to let us know all of your thoughts about today's episode and more. And next week, we will be talking about Enjo and the plight of Enkanomiya. So Brandon bringing some stuff up earlier. We'll definitely be deep diving further into next week. Were they a godless land? We'll find out soon. But on that note, safe journeys, travelers. We'll see you next time.
Bye, the second who nerded.